I'm Howie Lim. This is Money Hacks by the Business Times.
The mistake is often in blurring the two, and when that happens, the business is like a very hungry child that keeps taking from its siblings' food. So that works for a season, but it's not sustainable.
Running a small business is notoriously challenging, with owners often working long hours while taking on the central tasks of the business and much else. Plus, a lot of them put everything into their business, thinking that that will fund their retirement. That's risky though, because if things go south, So how can SME owners, because you don't want to be cash poor in old age, rethink their retirement planning? Welcome to Money Hacks, a podcast series by the Business Times, where we explore useful financial tips to help you on your money managing and wealth growing journey. I'm Howie Lim. Here's Grace Tay, Associate Director at Finexis Advisory, to help us today.
Thanks, Howie.
How can a business owner accurately value their business for a future sale? And how does that valuation impact their personal retirement planning?
So firstly, it's important to understand that a business isn't worth what you think it's worth. It's worth what someone is willing to pay for it when you're ready to walk away.
Okay.
So there are 3 ways that you can value a business for sale: cash flow, asset-based, as well as a market or multiples approach. So the first is discounted cash flow method, where we look at the likely money that a business is going to make in the future, and we discount it back to today's values. So this is useful for businesses with regular and predictable cash flows, things like consulting firms, clinics. The second approach is the asset-based approach, which is useful for more asset-heavy industries, so businesses that are in logistics or manufacturing, because a lot of that value is in property, inventory, and equipment. The last method is the multiples approach, which compares the business to similar ones that have been sold. So this is usually the one that's most intuitive to most business owners because it tells them how much the market is currently willing to pay. And the important thing across all 3 is to understand that almost always business owners walk away with a value that is lower than the number on paper. And that's because of things like transaction costs, taxes, earn-out conditions that actually reduce the final amount. So it's crucial to start diversifying wealth away from the business early on to a sale.
Are you seeing a lot of that happening? Because one can't value, obviously, my sweat, blood, and tears into the business.
Yes. These are some things that I understand business owners will need to pay attention to. But I think the key thing for SME owners to be mindful of is that a lot of them, they have majority of their net worth tied up in the business, which means that their retirement plan is heavily dependent upon how much they are able to sell the business for, which is very risky and definitely not ideal. In fact, yesterday I just met with a business owner, your classic SME owner, and her entire retirement plan was dependent upon how much she could sell this business in the future, and she didn't really have any other sources of potential income she could rely on.
Ooh, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on when they rely solely on business equity for retirement. That's dangerous. How about the most tax-efficient way to extract profits from the business? Because you did say it was time to maybe diversify some of your assets out because you want to fund your personal retirement savings instead of reinvesting everything into the business, right?
Yeah, that's correct. The business should not be your retirement plan. It's just the engine that fuels it. In Singapore, there are 3 tax-efficient ways in which to extract value from the business, and one should do that as soon as possible. So the first way is through dividends. So in Singapore, we have a 1-tier tax system, which means that dividends that are paid out from after-tax profits are no longer taxed in the hands of shareholders. This is a very simple and elegant approach where the company pays its dues once, and the rest of it can be enjoyed tax-free. So what I recommend is to mix small steady dividends for regular cash flow and to complement that with larger special dividends when there are excess profits. The second way is through things like salary, director's fees, bonuses, which are all tax-deductible expenses. So this is a win-win because the company gets to reduce its income tax payable. At the same time, it also funds your pay and CPF contributions. The third way is through a share sale because in Singapore, capital gains are not taxable. However, structure and timing does matter because if IRAS classifies this transaction as trading, it could become taxable. So it's important to seek professional advice before signing the actual sale agreement.
What about personal investment vehicles that maybe the SME owner can adopt? Because you want to think about liquidity, you also want to think about growth potential for retirement.
Yeah. In terms of the personal investment vehicles, first and foremost, the key is to separate the two source of funds. So I always say SME owners have two wallets. There is the business wallet and there is the personal wallet. The business wallet should be kept for business expenses, things like payroll, growth, inventory, whereas the personal wallet should be meant for things like retirement planning, kids' education, healthcare. The mistake is often in blurring the two, and when that happens, the business is like a very hungry child that keeps taking from its siblings' food. So that works for a season, but it's not sustainable. So before we look into the type of investment vehicles that an SME owner can adopt, which is generally what the rest of us can also have access to, it's important to understand the unique risks that SME owners face, which is different perhaps from you and I. SME owners, primarily, there are three risks that they face. The first is concentration risk. The second is personal liability. And the third is business continuity. So the first, SME owners tend to have this culture of being all in on the business. They tend to believe that I am the business. This is why you see a lot of SME owners being very asset heavy in their business, but underinvested personally, even if the business might perhaps be their best performing asset right now. In truth, even the most sensible investor will not put their entire life savings into one stock. So similarly, it's crucial to diversify away from the business. The second thing, personal liability. This often happens especially for SME setups where they are structured in a sole proprietorship or partnership model, or where owners have signed personal guarantees. This is dangerous because creditors can actually reach personal assets. So that's another reason to build wealth outside of the blast radius of the business, so-called. And also to have in place legal structures that clearly define business entity risk and personal wealth. And then the third thing in terms of business continuity, the thing is, illness, accidents, death, these are all unpredictable. And something as simple as perhaps a burst pipe could really stymie operations and put a dent in cash flow. For example, one of my clients recently had to pay 5 digits out of pocket because of a freak storm and a leaky roof. It caused extensive water damage to his premise, and he didn't have business insurance. So something like that should not actually derail a personal retirement plan. So in terms of vehicles for investing, I wouldn't go too far away from the base layer of having a globally diversified, flexible portfolio of stocks and bonds. It's important to understand that it's not just US, Singapore, or China more recently. Because if you only build a portfolio on these 3 countries, you are leaving out 40% of the rest of the world. So be mindful about strategic diversification that way. And then on top of that, if there are more surplus, owners can actually put it into a more aggressive bucket. Look for things like private markets or alternative assets that could compromise liquidity in exchange for higher potential returns. So it's important to know what's your time horizon for investing to understand whether illiquidity is acceptable. Also look at tax-smart strategies such as contributions to SRS, CPF, which can go a long way to reduce personal income tax payable. For example, voluntary top-ups to CPF gives you up to $16,000 a year in tax reliefs, and SRS another $15,300 to $35,700 depending on your residency. So these are all very underrated, tax-efficient retirement planning strategies that SME owners can adopt. They tend to neglect them because it takes research and also additional awareness to know of them, which they usually don't have the mindshare for. And then finally, have risk transfer tools in place that ensure that a business shock does not invade the personal balance sheet.
Still to come, is retirement planning different for a growing SME versus a mature, stable business? We'll find out more from Associate Director of finexis, Grace Tay. Stay with us.
Lens on Singapore is now bigger and better. The same deep dive exploration of socioeconomic and geopolitical issues which impact our lives here in Singapore and the region is now a video podcast. If watching a conversation is your thing, join Clarissa Montero in monthly conversations about things that matter. Subscribe to the BT Lens On playlist in the podcast tab of the Business Times YouTube channel and start watching today. BT Lens On Singapore, now available in audio and video.
And now, back to Money Hacks from the Business Times.
Welcome back. Grace, what about strategies that SME owners can implement now to ensure their business remains attractive to buyers, even if they, say, decide to sell earlier than planned?
Okay, so I think it's important to first define and understand what attractive is to a buyer. And here I suggest 4 areas. So the first is where a business has predictable revenue or high recurring revenues. And this can usually be seen in where there are service contracts available, subscriptions, for example, because buyers don't buy chaos, they buy consistency. The second thing is a business with a diversified customer base, so it's not singularly dependent on a large customer. Third thing is businesses with strong documentation as well as middle management in place so that the business does not live or die on the founder. And the fourth thing is to have clean audited financials in place with good controls and forecasts. So all of this actually reduce buyer risk and increase the multiples upon a sale. Here are some concrete actions that owners can take if they are looking to sell earlier than retirement, perhaps in the next 6 to 24 months. So the first thing is to have good customer data. So gather information on things like demographic, frequency of spend, magnitude of spend. So these are all important information, especially for businesses with recurring revenues. Data is king. The more of it we have, the more we can leverage for desired outcomes. The second thing is to establish strong cash flows because buyers pay a premium where a business has strong positive cash flow. Third thing is reduce owner dependency by having documented processes, having a buy-sell arrangement in place, having business continuity plans, and also importantly, hiring and empowering an operations lead who can run the day-to-day. So buyers again pay a premium for businesses that are not owner dependent. And then another thing businesses can do is to professionalize their reporting. For example, having audited accounts, monthly reporting of P&L, formal KPIs, because buyers will run multiple checks on the numbers to make sure that they are clean. And finally, and importantly, try to clean up legal and tax compliance matters, close the loop on any legacy-related party issues, update employment contracts, and clear any contingent liabilities because buyers heavily discount any messy legal or tax exposures. Having strong processes and governance is increasingly important. As we can see from the recent SME M&A data, private buyers are increasingly looking for retiring owners who have strong governance and processes in place. So governance is not sexy, but it sells.
Okay. I hear a lot of, owner dependent, which is one of the biggest pitfalls. What about some other pitfalls that they may fall into besides just, relying on business equity for retirement?
5 common things that you will hear SME owners say. These are why they can be pitfalls. So the first thing is that I will sell my business for 5 to 6 times multiple one day. But what they are thinking is a strategic multiple, whereas what buyers offer is an SME multiple, which is usually 2 to 3 times versus 5 to 6 times. That's because of certain factors that we talked about: founder dependency, customer concentration. So how to avoid this? Professionalize the business early, diversify the customer base, and have documented SOPs in place 12 to 24 months before you even consider a sale so as to be able to earn this higher multiple. The second thing is that I'll get all cash from the sale of the business. However, the actual offer can look very different because it often contains things like deferred payments, earn-out conditions, performance clauses. All of this reduce or delay the actual amount that comes out in cash to the owner. Rather than let this derail a retirement plan your retirement on net certain cash flows and treat all deferred payouts as a bonus. A third thing that you might hear a business owner say is that they can dip into their personal funds to tide over. However, if an owner keeps trying to rescue the business using their personal wealth, that personal nest egg never grows as well. So how to avoid this? It's to ring-fence personal wealth early and to set a hard cap to how much should be re-injected back into the business. So again, differentiate that business wallet from the personal wallet. And then the fourth thing, I'm invincible. Nothing will happen to me. I mean, you all know that illness and death is unpredictable. So if that were to happen to a founder and there aren't proper processes or funding arrangements in place to ensure business continuity, what we often find is that the business value evaporates at a time when the founder's family needs it the most. So how to avoid this is to have your proper key man insurance in place, buy-sell agreements funded by insurance, and business continuity plans documented. And then the final thing that I often hear business owners say is that I don't need diversification because the business is my investment. That's why they have a high amount of net worth in the business. However, this is very dangerous because it exposes the owner to sector-specific risks such as a change in regulation, a change in technology, even landlord issues that could destroy business value. So how to avoid this would be to simply start a second wallet early and diversify into assets that are separated from business risks. So this would then be your business agnostic wealth.
Are there differences though if, say, yours is a growing SME or one that's more mature?
I think the difference comes in what do you optimize for. So for a growing SME, the key is to optimize for optionality and cash flow flexibility. Whereas for a mature SME, they should be optimizing for extraction of value and preservation of wealth. So I would look at the strategies in three aspects. So in terms of cash flow, in terms of the extraction policy, and in terms of investment vehicles. So firstly, in terms of cash flow, for a growing SME, cash is fuel. They need it to actively reinvest into the business to stabilize that growth. So for the owner, they can't afford to lock up too much personally. Whereas for a mature SME, the owner can afford to take a longer-term view to his investment choices, including perhaps sacrificing some liquidity for higher potential returns in the future. The second thing is when it comes to extraction policy. So for a growing SME, the extraction policy needs to be variable because cash flows are lumpy. So in a good year, the business should sweep a bigger part of these profits in the form of dividends back to shareholders. Whereas in a leaner year, perhaps keep it to a minimum or even none at all. Whereas for a mature SME, they can afford to have a more fixed, disciplined cadence of this extraction of the value. So in the form of perhaps quarterly dividends or annual dividends. And then finally, in terms of investment vehicles, again, going back to optionality and flexibility, a growing SME's owner should look at platforms that are more liquid and easily accessible. They should also focus on perhaps building their emergency buffers first before starting on a small global asset portfolio that requires little time or energy to manage. Whereas for a mature SME owner, they can afford to take a more longer dated or less liquid choice of investment vehicles. And once they have set up a robust core retirement portfolio, they can also look at creating a satellite play portfolio where they can afford to take higher risk for higher potential returns.
How to balance, though? You feel like you want to reinvest into your business for business growth, and then you also need to build your personal wealth, keep it separate like you were talking about.
I think the business needs to be seen as the growth engine, whereas your personal portfolio is the safety engine. So a good plan ideally allows you to run both at the same time. So here's a 5-step process to think about how do you balance the two. First and foremost, ensure that owners are paid. So this means deciding what is a healthy reinvestment rate back into the business. Perhaps 30 to 50% of profits can go back into the business. Anything below that might risk starving growth. Anything above that might result in the business hoarding idle cash. So both are not ideal. The second step would be to automate extraction above the reinvestment rate. So this should be swept out on a fixed cadence in the form of dividends back to shareholders. And the owners can then take this amount of money to invest it in their personal portfolios that are diversified away from business risk. The third step is to ensure that the vehicles that owners choose to invest in are matched to cash flow volatility. So for example, a portion of money income can go into a core retirement portfolio that's properly diversified, and any excess extraction can be topped up into a flexible vehicle that's built to handle volatility because it comes as a lump sum. So in a good year, the owner can afford to top up more. In a leaner year, top up less. The fourth step is to protect the business so that it doesn't raid personal assets, to have in place key man insurance, business continuity plans, as well as any buy-sell arrangements when the owner decides to exit the business or something happens to the owner. So this ensures that the owner isn't forced to dip into personal assets to fund a shock to the business. The final step is to review both engines annually to see if any adjustments need to be made. For example, if a business becomes more mature, perhaps that reinvestment rate can go down and they can afford to optimize for extraction, have a greater amount of that value extracted back to his or her personal portfolio.
Grace, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you, Howie.
Grace Tay is the Associate Director at finexis Advisory. This has been Money Hacks by the Business Times. I'm Howie Lim.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.